The road had no name. It was not marked on maps, nor spoken of in markets or taverns. Those who travelled it did so quietly, as if even mentioning it aloud might cause it to vanish, or worse, remember them. By the time dusk began to bleed into the sky, the traveller had already walked for hours without seeing another soul. His boots scraped softly against loose gravel, the sound swallowed quickly above surrounding mist. It was a strange kind of silence, not empty, but listening. As though the mountain itself had ears, and every step was being noted. He tightened his cloak. The air grew colder the higher he climbed, carrying with it the faint scent of damp stone and something older, like forgotten places sealed too long from light. Far below, the valley had disappeared beneath a thick blanket of fog. Above, the sky dimmed into deep shades of blue and silver. The first stars hesitated behind slow-moving clouds. He had been told to reach the monastery before nightfall. He had not. A path curved sharply along the mountain's edge, revealing, at last, the structure he had been searching for. It stood carved into the cliff itself. The monastery was not grand, nor welcoming. Its stone walls were worn smooth by centuries of wind, its windows narrow and dark. No torches burned along its outer edges. No voices echoed from within, only stillness, and above it all, the bell tower. It rose higher than the rest of the structure, thin and watchful, its silhouette cutting into the fading sky. No light shone from its narrow openings, yet something about it felt awake. The traveller stopped. For a moment he simply watched. Then a sound, low, deep, distant, gong, the bell. It rang once. The sound did not echo in the way he expected. It did not bounce from rock to rock or fade quickly into the air. Instead, it seemed to pass through everything, the ground beneath his feet, the air in his lungs, even the quiet space behind his thoughts. He exhaled slowly, not realizing he had been holding his breath. The bell had not sounded like a call. It had sounded like a reminder. Without thinking, he resumed walking. As he approached the monastery gates, he noticed something strange. The heavy wooden doors stood slightly open, just enough for a person to pass through without effort. No guards, no grating, no hesitation. He stepped inside. The courtyard beyond was dim, lit only by a few candles placed along the edges of the stone walls. Their flames flickered gently, unaffected by any breeze. Shadows stretched long and thin across the ground, unmoving. A figure stood near the far archway, an old monk, robed in simple cloth, his head bowed slightly, his hands folded within his sleeves. He did not speak when the traveller approached, did not smile, did not frown. He simply looked at him. There was something unusual in his gaze, not unkind, but distant, as though he were looking through the traveller rather than at him. The traveller opened his mouth to speak, to ask for shelter, for direction, for anything, but before a single word could leave his lips, the monk slowly raised one finger, not in warning, not in anger, just gently, and then, with the smallest motion, he turned his head toward the bell tower. The meaning was clear. No words. Not here. Not now. A second monk passed silently behind them, carrying small candle. His footsteps made no sound. His expression did not change. He did not acknowledge either of them. The traveller felt it then. The rule, not spoken, yet absolute. Silence. A faint unease settled in his chest. Not fear, but something heavier, like stepping into deep water and realizing too late how far the bottom truly was. The old monk gestured softly, inviting him to follow. Through narrow corridors they walked, their footsteps echoing faintly against cold stone walls. The air inside the monastery was warmer, yet carried a stillness that felt preserved, untouched, untimed. They passed doorways leading into darkened rooms, each one empty, or perhaps simply too quiet to reveal its occupants. At last, they reached a small chamber. Inside, a simple bed, a wooden table, a single candle, already lit. The monk paused at the doorway. For a moment, he studied the traveller once more, his eyes lingering just a fraction longer than before. Then, slowly, he inclined his head and left, alone. The traveller stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. He sat on the edge of the bed, listening. There were no voices, no wind, no movement. Only the faint crackle of the candle flame, and somewhere far above, the quiet presence of the bell, waiting. The candle burned with a steady, patient flame. The traveller watched it for a long time, though he could not have said how long. Time inside the chamber had not seemed to move the way it had on the mountain path. The usual markers, the fading of light, the shifting of shadows, felt distant here, muted, as though the monastery kept its own quiet rhythm, separate from the world below. He lay back on the narrow bed, boots still on, cloak wrapped loosely around him. The stone walls held a lingering warmth, yet the air carried a faint chill that brushed against his skin. Like a whisper, sleep did not come, not fully. Instead, he drifted in that soft space between waking and dreaming, where thoughts loosen their edges and sounds grow heavier. At first, there was nothing. Then, a soft movement beyond the door. Not footsteps, not quite, more like the careful passing of fabric against a stone. His eyes opened. The candle had burned lower. He sat up slowly, listening. Again, that same faint sound, moving along the corridor outside, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. He swung his legs off the bed, the floor cold beneath his boots, and moved toward the door. For a moment, his hand hovered above the latch. The rule returned to him then. Silence. It pressed against his thoughts, not as a command, but as a presence, something understood rather than enforced. Still, curiosity moved him. He eased the door open. The corridor stretched empty in both directions, lit only by small candles placed at measured intervals along the walls. Their light barely reached the ceiling, leaving the upper arches swallowed in shadow. And yet he was not alone. A figure stood at the far end, Another monk, facing away from him, motionless. The traveller waited, expecting some acknowledgement, some small shift that would confirm the man had noticed him. Nothing came. Instead, the monk began to move, slowly. Not walking in the usual sense, but gliding with such softness that his robes barely stirred the air. He passed one candle, then another, his shadow stretching and shrinking, along the stone as he went. Drawn without knowing why, the traveller stepped into the corridor. His own footsteps sounded too loud, too solid, in a place that seemed to prefer gentler things. The monk did not turn. He simply continued forward. The corridor curved, narrowing slightly as it led deeper into the monastery. The walls grew older here, the stone darker, worn by time in a way that felt intentional, as though this part of the monastery had been shaped not just by years, but by purpose. They reached a junction, 3 paths. The monk paused. For a long moment he stood completely still, his head slightly tilted, as if listening to something far beyond the walls. Then, without hesitation, he turned toward the narrowest passage. The traveller followed. The air changed as they moved, colder, heavier. The faint scent of stone deepened into something older, dust, perhaps, or the quiet trace of spaces long undisturbed. The passage sloped upward, step by step. They climbed. The ceiling lowered, forcing the traveller to bow his head slightly. The candles here were fewer, their light dimmer, leaving long stretches of shadow between each flicker, and ahead, a spiral, a narrow staircase, winding upward into darkness. The monk began to ascend. The traveller hesitated only briefly before following. Each step creaked softly beneath his weight, the sound echoing upward in slow, repeating patterns. The walls pressed close on either side, their rough surface brushing against his sleeve as he climbed. Higher, higher. The air grew thinner, touched now by the faintest trace of wind. And then he heard it. Not the bell itself, but something connected to it, a low, almost imperceptible vibration, like the memory of a sound, lingering long after it had passed. It hummed through the stone, through the narrow steps beneath his feet, through him. The monk continued without pause. At last, the staircase opened into a small chamber, circular, bare. A single narrow window cut into the wall, revealing a slice of night sky beyond. The clouds had thinned, allowing pale moonlight to spill inward, casting a faint silver glow across the floor. In the center of the room, a rope, thick, worn. It ascended from the darkness above, disappearing into the unseen space of the bell tower. The monk stopped beside it. Slowly, he turned. For the first time, the traveller saw his face clearly. It was neither young nor old, not in the way faces usually are. There were lines, yes, but they did not seem tied to age. His eyes held a stillness that felt deeper than time, as if they had watched the same moment repeat itself endlessly. He looked at the traveller, then at the rope, then back again. No words. None needed. The meaning settled quietly, like dust finding its place. This was the bell. This was where it lived. The traveller stepped closer, his gaze lifting upward, trying to see where the rope led, but the darkness above refused to reveal its shape, only the faint outline of something vast, suspended, waiting. He reached out, hesitating just before his fingers touched the rope. It looked ordinary, rough, worn by countless hands, yet something about it felt alive, not moving, not breathing, but aware. He pulled his hand back. Behind him, the monk had already turned away. Without a sound, he began to descend the staircase once more, leaving the traveller alone in the chamber, alone with the rope, alone with the quiet hum that lingered in the air. Time passed, or perhaps it did not. Then, without warning, gong, the bell rang, closer, now, deeper. The sound filled the chamber completely, pressing against the walls, the floor, the air itself. The traveller felt it in his chest, his bones, his breath. It did not fade quickly, it lingered, like a presence refusing to leave. And as the final trace of the sound settled into silence, he realized something. The monk had not rung it. He had seen no movement, no hand upon the rope. Yet the bell has sounded on its own. The sound did not end, not truly. Though the bell's voice had faded from the air, something of it remained, pressed into the silence like an imprint. The chamber felt different now, as if the very space had shifted to make room for what had passed through it. The traveller stood still, listening, waiting, but nothing followed. No second toll, no echo, only that deep, lingering quiet. Slowly, he turned towards the staircase. The monk was gone. No footsteps marked his descent. No flicker of candlelight betrayed his path. It was as if he had never been there at all. For a moment, the traveller considered following him, returning to the lower halls, to the small keep, to the simple certainty of walls and bed and flame. But his gaze drifted back to the rope. It hung exactly as before, unmoved. He stepped closer. This time, he did not hesitate as long. His fingers reached out, brushed against the coarse fibers, cold. That was the first thing he noticed, not the roughness, not the weight, the cold, as though the rope had never known warmth, as though every hand that had touched it had left no trace behind. He tightened his grip, just slightly. Nothing happened. No sound, no shift in the air. The bell did not answer him. He exhaled slowly and released it. The rope swayed, just a little, then stilled once more. And yet the feeling remained. That faint awareness, not in the rope itself, perhaps, but around it, like standing at the edge of deep water, where you cannot see what lies beneath, but you know it is there, watching. He stepped back. The chamber seemed smaller now. Or perhaps he was simply more aware of its boundaries. The narrow window drew his attention. He crossed to it, placing a hand against the cold stone as he leaned slightly forward. The night outside had deepened. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, their shapes shifting like thoughts are formed and quickly forgotten. The moon drifted between them, casting pale light across the sea of fog below. But something else caught his eye. Far beneath the monastery, where the mountain sloped down into the hidden valley, the mist did not move as the clouds did. It rested, thick, unbroken, as if held in place by something unseen. He watched it for a long time, and then a ripple, small, almost nothing, just a faint disturbance along the surface of the fog, like a breath passing through it. He blinked. The mist returned to stillness. Perhaps he had imagined it. The mountain played tricks on the eyes, he told himself. The long journey, the thin air, the strange quiet, it was enough to make any mind wander. Still, he did not look away. Minutes passed, or longer. Then, once more, gong. The bell rang again. The traveller flinched this time, though he had been expecting it. The sound was different now, not louder, not softer, but closer, as though it had not come from above him, but from within, the very walls, within him. His breath caught. The vibration settled deep in his chest, spreading outward in slow, steady ways. And, as it did, the fog below shifted again. Not a ripple this time, a movement, slow, heavy, like something turning beneath a blanket. The traveller leaned forward, his fingers tightening against the stone. The mist rose slightly, then fell, rose again, then stilled. His heart beat faster now, though the rest of him remained strangely calm, detached, as if part of him had stepped back, choosing only to observe. The bell's echo faded. Silence returned. But it was not the same silence as before. This one felt occupied. He stepped away from the window. The chamber seemed darker now, though the moonlight had not changed. Shadows gathered in the corners, stretching just a little further than they had before. He turned slowly, taking in the space, the rope, the walls, the narrow stair. Everything was as it had been. And yet, different. He moved toward the staircase, his steps careful, measured. Halfway there, he stopped. A thought had come to him. Not sudden, not sharp, but steady. The bell had rung twice. Once when he first arrived, and now again. Each time, the fog had moved. He glanced back at the rope, then upward, into the darkness, where the bell hung unseen. A quiet understanding began to form. Not complete, not yet, but enough to settle uneasily in his chest. The bell was not calling. It was not marking time. It was doing something else, something slower, something deliberate. He descended the first step, then another. The staircase welcomed him back into its narrow embrace, the air growing warmer as he moved downward. But even as he left the chamber behind, the feeling followed. That low, quiet awareness, like a presence that did not need to move, to remain close. Step by step, he returned to the lower corridors. The monastery had not changed. The candles still burned. The halls still stretched in patient silence. But now, he understood. This place was not empty. It had never been. Somewhere above, unseen in the dark, the bell waited, and far below, beneath the unmoving fog, something listened. The corridors felt longer, on the way down. Or perhaps the traveller noticed more now, the slight unevenness in the stone beneath his feet, the way the candlelight seemed to hesitate before reaching certain corners, the faint echo that followed him just a moment too late. He did not rush. Something about the monastery discouraged haste. Even his breathing had slowed, without his noticing, settling into a quiet rhythm that matched the stillness around him. When he reached the lower passage, he paused. The silence was unchanged, but it no longer felt empty. He turned toward where he remembered his chamber to be, though the corridors looked subtly different now, not rearranged, not unfamiliar, just difficult to hold in memory. As if the monastery did not wish to be easily known, still his feet carried him forward, and then a soft glow, warmer than the candlelit halls. It spilled from an open archway ahead, stretching across the floor in a long golden shape. Drawn to it, he stepped closer. Inside was a hall, larger than any room he had yet seen. A long wooden table ran through its center, lined with simple bowls and cups. Candles deep and placed at even intervals along its length, their flames steady and bright, filling the space with a gentle, wavering light, and seated along both sides. There were more of them than he expected, a dozen, perhaps more, all robed in the same muted cloth, all seated in perfect stillness, eating. No one spoke, no one looked up. The only sound was the quiet movement of wooden spoons against bowls, soft and rhythmic, like distant rain, tapping against stone. The traveller stood at the entrance, uncertain. Then, from the far end of the table, the old monk lifted his gaze, just slightly enough. He made no gesture, no signal, but the meaning reached the traveller clearly. Come. Slowly, he stepped inside. The warmth of the room settled around him, easing the faint chill that had followed him from the tower. He moved along the side of the table until he found an empty place. A bowl had already been set there. He did not remember seeing anyone place it. He sat. The monks beside him did not react. Their movements continued, steady and unbroken, spoon to bowl, bowl to lips. A quiet rhythm, repeated without thought or variation. He looked down at his own bowl, a simple broth. Steam rose gently from its surface, carrying a faint, comforting scent, earthy, warm, familiar. He realized then how hungry he was. Carefully, he picked up the spoon. The sound it made to guess the bowl seemed louder than the others, though he could not tell if it truly was, or if his awareness had simply sharpened. He took a small sip. The broth was warm, not hot, not cold, just enough. He swallowed, and something in him settled, not fully, but enough. The tension he had carried from the mountain path, from the climb, from the bell, it loosened slightly, as if the act of eating here required a certain quieting of the mind. He took another sip. Around him the monks continued. No one hurried, no one paused. Each movement followed the last, with gentle precision, like a pattern long practiced. Time passed, or perhaps it simply repeated. The traveller found himself matching their rhythm without meaning to. Spoon, sip, breathe. Spoon, sip, breathe. The world outside the hall seemed distant now. Even the memory of the bell softened, its weight dulled by the warmth of the room, until a shift, small, almost imperceptible. The old monk at the far end of the table set down his spoon. At once, all movement stopped, not gradually, not unevenly, but together. Every monk placed their spoon down. At the same moment, the sound, though quiet, felt final. The traveller froze, his own spoon halfway to the bowl. He slowly lowered it. No one spoke. No one moved. The candles flickered once, their flames bending gently, though no wind passed through the hall. Then the old monk stood. The others followed, one by one, in perfect silence. Chairs did not scrape. Robes did not rustle. Even their breathing seemed too soft to hear. The traveller rose, as well, unsure, but unwilling to break the pattern. The monks turned, not toward him, not toward the doors, but towards the walls, each one facing outward, away from the table, still waiting. The traveller hesitated, then, slowly, he turned as well. The stone wall stood close before him, its surface worn smooth by time. The candlelight danced faintly across it, casting shifting shadows that seemed almost deliberate. He listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, a sound, distant, familiar, gong, the bell, again, but different. This time, it did not feel like it came from above, nor from within. It felt everywhere. The traveller's breath caught. The vibration passed through the hall, through the walls, through the still figures standing beside him. No one moved. No one reacted. They simply stood, facing the stone, as if this was expected, as if this was the reason they had gathered. The sound lingered, then faded, and in its place a deeper silence, one that seemed to press inward rather than stretch outward. The traveller became aware of his own heartbeat, slow, heavy, loud against the quiet. He swallowed, and in that small, involuntary motion he felt it, a subtle shift, not in the room, not in the monks, but somewhere beyond, below, far beneath the monastery. Something had answered, not with sound, not with movement he could see, but with presence, a quiet acknowledgement. The bell had rung, and something had listened. The monks remained still for several long moments more. Then, as one, they turned back toward the table. The old monk looked at the traveller again. His gaze lingered slightly longer this time. Not distant, not entirely. There was something else there now. Something that might have been recognition, or perhaps concern. He lowered his eyes. The others followed, and without a word, they began to leave. One by one, they exited the hall, their footsteps soft and measured, disappearing into the dim corridors beyond. The traveller stood alone for a moment. The candles burned lower now, their light softer, gentler. The bowls remained on the table, untouched, uncleared, as if the meal had never truly been about eating. He looked toward the archway. The darkness beyond seemed deeper than before, and though no rule had been spoken, he understood it more clearly now. The silence here was not simply a choice, it was a necessity, because something far below the monastery was always listening. The hall emptied without sound. One by one, the monks disappeared into the corridors, their forms dissolving into shadow, until only the faint glow of the candles remained. The traveller stood alone beside the long table, listening to the quiet settle back into place. It returned quickly, as if it had only stepped aside for a moment. He did not follow them immediately. Something held him there. Not fear, not fast certainty, but a quiet pull, subtle, persistent. The bell, even now, long after its last toll had faded, he could still feel it. A low, distant presence resting beneath his thoughts, like a memory that refused to disappear. He turned slowly toward the archway. The corridor beyond waited in stillness. He stepped forward. The air felt different again, cooler, heavier, as though the monastery shifted with each passing hour, revealing new layers of itself only when the time was right. He walked without a clear destination, past narrow doorways, past flickering candles, past corners that seemed almost familiar, yet never quite the same. And then he noticed it. A passage he had not seen before, set lower into the wall, partially hidden by shadow. No candle marked its entrance. No light invited him in. Yet something about it felt deliberate, as if it had been waiting. He paused. The silence deepened around him, pressing gently against his awareness. He could turn back, return to his chamber, rest, forget. But the thought did not take hold. Instead, he stepped toward the darkness. The passage sloped downward, not steeply, but enough to feel. The stone beneath his boots changed, smoother, older, worn in a way that suggested fewer feet had passed this way. The air cooled further. A faint dampness touched the walls, carrying the scent of deep earth and still water. He moved slowly, carefully. The darkness did not feel empty. It felt occupied, not by movement, not by sound, but by something quieter, something that did not need to reveal itself to be present. After several steps, a faint light appeared ahead, dim, unsteady. He followed it. The passage opened into a small chamber, lower than the others. The ceiling pressed close overhead, the stone arching just enough to allow him to stand. In the center of the room, a single candle, and beside it, a figure, seated, still. The traveller stopped at the threshold. The figure did not move. At first, he thought it might be another statue, like those sometimes found in old places, carved in stone, left mark forgotten time. But then, a breath, slow, measured, The figure was alive. An old man, older than any of the monks he had seen above. His robe was the same simple cloth, yet it hung more loosely, as if it had been worn for many years without replacement. His hands rested in his lap, thin and still, the skin drawn tight over bone. His eyes were closed. The traveller took a cautious step forward. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. The old man did not react. Another step, closer now. The air felt heavier here, pressing gently against his chest, as though each breath required just a little more effort. Then, without warning, the old man's eyes opened. They were clear, not clouded with age, not dim, but steady, deep. He did not look surprised. He did not look disturbed. He simply looked at the traveller. And in that gaze, there was something different from the others, not distant, not detached, aware, fully. The traveller felt it immediately. A quiet weight settling over him, not oppressive, but undeniable, as if the room itself had taken notice of his presence. He opened his mouth, instinct, habit to speak, but no sound came. Not because he chose silence, but because something held the words back before they could form. The old man watched him. Then, slowly, very slowly, he lifted one hand, not high, just enough. His fingers moved, not in a gesture of warning, not quite, more like a reminder. The traveller felt it then, stronger than before. The rule, silence. But here, it was not just understood. It was enforced, gently, firmly, absolutely. He lowered his gaze. The old man's hand stilled. For a moment, neither of them moved. The candle flame wavered slightly, then steadied. Time stretched. Soft, unbroken. Then the old man shifted, only slightly. His hand lowered back into his lap. His gaze remained fixed on the traveller, but something within it changed, just enough to be felt. An invitation. Carefully, the traveller stepped closer. The stone floor felt colder here. He stopped a few paces away. The old man's eyes flickered briefly toward the wall behind him, then back. The movement was small, but deliberate. The traveller followed the direction of his glance. At first, he saw nothing, just stone, worn, dark, unremarkable. Then lines, faint, carved into the surface, so shallow they were almost invisible in the shifting light. He stepped closer. The candle flickered again, its flame bending just enough to reveal the markings more clearly. They were not words, not in any language. He recognized symbols, repeating, layered over one another, as if carved across many years, perhaps by many hands. He traced them with his eyes. Patterns that almost made sense, then slicked away before they could fully form. Behind him, the old man remained still, watching, waiting. The traveller turned back toward him. A question rose in his mind, clear, unavoidable. "Who are you?" But again, no words came. The silence held, stronger here, deeper. The old man seemed to understand. He inclined his head slightly. Then, very slowly, he lifted his gaze upward, not toward the traveller, not toward the walls, but above, through the ceiling, toward the unseen tower, toward the bell. The meaning settled quietly. Not spoken, not explained, but known. This man did not believe. The traveller felt it then, a quiet certainty. This chamber was not a place one visited. It was a place one remained. Above, the bell waited. Below, something listened. And here, between them, sat Wolfwan, who stayed. The old man did not speak. He did not need to. His gaze, lifted toward the unseen tower above, lingered there for a long moment before returning to the traveller. In that quiet exchange, something passed between them, not knowledge, not instruction, but a simple understanding. Then, slowly, the old man moved. It was the first full motion the traveller had seen from him. He placed his hands against the stone floor and rose, not with effort, but with a careful, practiced stillness. His robe shifted softly around him, the fabric whispering against itself in the silence. For a moment, he stood, balanced, unmoving. Then he turned, not toward the traveller, but toward the passage from which he had come. A gentle inclination of his head followed, an invitation. The traveller hesitated only briefly before stepping aside, allowing the old man to pass. As he did, the air seemed to shift again, lighter, though the weight of the place did not fully lift. He followed. The passage felt narrower on the return, the ceiling lower, the walls closer. The faint dampness clung to the stone, and the candlelight from the chamber behind them faded quickly, swallowed by the dark. Yet the old man moved without hesitation. He did not carry a light. He did not reach for the walls. He simply walked, and somehow the path revealed itself. Step by step they ascended. The slope of the passage eased, then levelled, opening once more into the familiar corridors above. The candles here still burned in their quiet, measured way, unchanged by the passing of time. The monastery, it seemed, did not sleep. It only shifted. They walked in silence, past archways, past empty halls, past doors that remained closed. No other monks appeared. No footsteps echoed beyond their own. It was as if the entire place had drawn inward, leaving only this single path open. The traveller became aware of something else then, a rhythm, faint, deep. Not a sound, exactly, but a pattern. It moved through the walls, through the floor beneath his feet, through the quiet space between each breath. He recognized it, the bell, not ringing, but waiting. They reached the base of the spiral staircase, the same narrow ascent he had climbed before, the same darkness, curling upward into unseen heights. The old man paused. For the first time since leaving the chamber below, he turned fully toward the traveller. Their eyes met. There was no question in the old man's gaze, no doubt, only a quiet certainty. And beneath it, something else, weariness, not of the body, but of time, of repetition, of something carried too long. He lifted his hand slowly and placed it against the rope that hung beside the staircase entrance. The traveller had not noticed it before. A smaller rope, thinner, less worn. It did not lead upward into the tower, but downward, disappearing into the darkness below. The old man's fingers rested against it for a moment, then released. His gaze shifted again, upward, toward the tower, toward the bell. The meaning settled, clear, unavoidable. The traveller felt it before he fully understood it. A quiet pressure, a pull, not on his body, but somewhere deeper. He turned toward the staircase. The first step waited, worn smooth by time. He placed his foot upon it, paused, then began to climb. The old man did not follow. He remained at the base, his presence steady, watching, not with urgency, not with expectation, but with a calm acceptance, as though this moment had always been leading here. The staircase narrowed as it rose. The air thinned. Each step carried the traveller further from the grounded stillness below, and closer to something less certain. The faint rhythm grew stronger, not louder, but clearer, like a heartbeat, heard through layers of stone. He climbed higher, 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 until at last the staircase opened once more into the circular chamber. The rope hung at its center, unchanged, unmoving. The narrow window revealed the night beyond, clouds drifting slowly across the sky, the moon pale and distant. But the traveller's attention did not linger there. It returned to the rope. He stepped closer. This time there was no hesitation. His hand reached out, closed around it. The cold remained. But beneath it, something else, weight, not physical, not entirely, but present. It settled into his arm, into his chest, as though the rope carried more than its own substance, as though it held the memory of every hand that had ever touched it, every moment, every toll. He tightened his hold. The chamber seemed to draw inward, the walls closer, the air heavier, the quiet deeper. Then, without thinking, he pulled, not hard, not forcefully, just enough. The rope moved, a slow, deliberate motion, and above, something answered, a shift in the darkness, a presence stirring. The traveller held his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, gong. The bell rang, closer than ever before, deeper, heavier. It did not pass through him this time. It settled, stayed. The vibration filled the chamber, the staircase, the corridors below, spreading outward in slow, steady waves. And far beneath, the fog moved, not a ripple, not a ripple, not a ripple, not a ripple, but something slower, something larger, turning. The traveller's grip tightened. He felt it now, clearly, the connection, the bell above, the thing below, and between them, the rope in his hands. The sound faded, But the weight did not. It remained, resting quietly within him. He released the rope. Slowly, carefully, it stilled. The chamber returned to silence. But it was not the same silence as before. This one held something new, something that had not been there until now. He stepped back, his breath unsteady, his thoughts quieter than they should have been, as if the bell had taken something with it when it rang, or left something behind. Below, at the base of the staircase, the old man remained, waiting, not for the bell, not for the night to pass, but for something else, something the traveller was only beginning to understand. The bell did not ring on its own, not truly. It waited for hands, for timing, for someone to carry its weight. And now, for the first time, the traveller felt that weight settle fully into place. The rope no longer felt unfamiliar. The traveller stood in the centre of the chamber, his hand resting lightly against its coarse surface. He was no longer testing it, no longer reaching with hesitation. Instead, he held it as one might hold something already known, something that had, in a quiet way, always been there. The weight remained, not pressing, not overwhelming, just present. Below, the monastery lay wrapped in its steady silence. The corridors, the halls, the candle-lit rooms, they all continued as before, untouched by the moment that had just passed. And yet, something had changed. He could feel it, not in the walls, not in the air, but within the rhythm of the place itself. He stepped toward the narrow window. The night had deepened further. The moon had shifted, now resting higher in the sky, its pale light stretching across the sea of fog below. He looked down. The mist remained thick, unmoving at first glance, but now he saw more. Subtle variations, slow currents, movements so gradual they might once have gone unnoticed. The bell had changed the way he saw. Or perhaps it had simply allowed him to notice what had always been there. He waited, watched, and after a long quiet moment, the fog spurred, not suddenly, not violently, but with a slow, heavy motion, like something turning in sleep. His breath slowed. He did not step back. He did not look away. The movement continued for a few seconds, then stilled once more, settling back into its endless quiet rest. He understood now, not fully, but enough. The bell did not wake what lay below. It held it. It guided its stillness, like a hand resting gently over something that must not rise too quickly. Behind him, the chamber remained unchanged. The rope hung steady, waiting. He'd turned back toward it. Time had begun to feel different again. Not stretched, not lost, but measured, carefully. Each moment settling into place with quiet precision, and then he felt it, not heard, not seen, but known. The next hour, approaching, it did not arrive with a sound or signal. It simply came, like a tide, unseen, yet certain. The traveller stepped closer to the rope. His hand found it without searching. His fingers curled around it, settling naturally into its worn fibers. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only a quiet readiness. He waited, a breath, another. Then he pulled. The motion was slow, deliberate, measured, and above, the bell answered. Gong! The sound spread outward, filling the chamber, the tower, the monastery below. But now it felt different, not foreign, not overwhelming. It moved through him as much as around him, settling into place like a note in a song he had begun to understand. He held the rope until the sound faded, then released. The silence returned, steady, balanced. Below, the fog shifted once more, not in resistance, not in unrest, but in response, like something acknowledging the rhythm it had come to depend on. The traveller stepped back. His breathing remained calm, his thoughts quiet. The fear he might have expected, of the unknown, of the unseen, did not come. It had no place here. There was only the rhythm, the hours, the waiting. He moved to the edge of the chamber and sat. The stone floor was cool beneath him, but not uncomfortable. The narrow window framed the night in stillness, the drifting clouds marking a passage of time that felt separate from the one he now kept. Below, at the base of the staircase, the old man remained. He had not moved, not since the traveller had begun his climb. From above he appeared smaller now, his figure softened by distance and shadow. Yet his presence was as steady as ever, unchanged, unwavering, watching, not with expectation, not with urgency, but with quiet understanding. The traveller felt it, a connection, not spoken, not explained, but shared. The old man knew. He had always known. This was not a task given, not a role assigned. It was something taken on, quietly, without words, without ceremony. 1 hour. Then the next, and the next. He leaned his head back against the stone wall, his eyes drifting toward the ceiling, where the unseen bell hung in the darkness above. It no longer felt distant. It felt close, like something resting just beyond sight, waiting for its moment to speak. The rhythm settled deeper. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, to the quiet, to the space between sounds, to the slow, steady passing of time that was no longer measured by sun or shadow, but by something simpler, something older. The hour came again. He felt it, rose without thought, stepped forward, took the rope, pulled. Gong! The bell rang, and the world, above and below, remained in balance. The hours passed without resistance. They did not drag, nor did they rush ahead. Each one arrived with the same quiet certainty, settling into place like a breath that had always been waiting to be taken. The traveller no longer questioned it. He rose when the hour came. He took the rope, He pulled, and the bell answered, again and again. Each toll spread outward in slow, steady waves, pressing gently against the walls of the tower, the corridors below, the sleeping fog beyond the mountain. The rhythm held, and with it, something else. A balance. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but as the night deepened, the traveller began to feel it more clearly. The space between each coal carried a different weight now, not empty, not silent, in the way it had once been, but filled with something quiet and watchful. He stood by the window once more. The moon had begun its slow descent, its light softer now, more diffused, as it passed behind thin layers of cloud. Below, the fog remained, but it was no longer still, not entirely. He watched as it shifted, slow currents moving beneath its surface, folding and unfolding like breath, drawn deep and released just as slowly. Then a pause, the movement stilled. For a long moment, nothing changed, and then a shape, not clear, not defined, but present. The traveller leaned closer, his hand resting lightly against the cold stone of the window's edge. The fog seemed to gather in one place, thickening slightly, rising just fraction higher than the rest. It did not break, it did not part, it simply lifted. As if something beneath it had shifted its weight, the traveller's breath slowed. His eyes did not move. The shape remained for only a moment. Then gently it sank back into the fog, dissolving into the soft, endless white, gone, or hidden once more. He did not step back, did not turn away. Something in him had already begun to accept what he was seeing, not as a surprise, not as a fear, but as part of the rhythm he now kept. Above him, the bell waited. He could feel it more clearly now, not just as a presence, but as something connected, something that responded, that held, that guided. He turned toward the rope. The hour was nearing again, not yet, but close, closer than before. Time no longer needed counting. It simply revealed itself. He stood beside the rope, his hand resting against it. This time, he did not look upward. He did not wonder what shape the bell took in the darkness above. He only felt its weight, its readiness, and beneath that, something else, a quiet strain, faint, almost unnoticed, but there. As if the rhythm, though steady, was not without effort. He waited. The moment arrived. He pulled. Gong. The bell rang. The sound was deeper now, not louder, but fuller. It filled the chamber more completely, pressing gently against the walls before passing outward into the night. The traveller held the rope longer this time, not by intention, but because it felt necessary, as though releasing it too quickly might allow something to slip. He felt it, then, clearly, below. The fog did not simply move, it responded. The shape returned, larger now, though still undefined, a slow rise, a shifting weight beneath the surface, not reaching, not breaking through, but pressing upward, as if testing the boundary that held it in place. The traveller's grip tightened, not in fear, but in instinct. The bell's sound lingered longer than before. Then, slowly, it faded. He released the rope. The silence returned. But it was not empty. It carried a faint tension now, like a surface stretched just enough to hold what lay beneath. He stepped back, his breathing steady, his thoughts quiet, but deeper now, more aware. He turned once more to the window. The fog had settled again, the shape gone, hidden, but not forgotten. He understood something now. The bell did not simply keep time. It kept distance. Each toll held the boundary in place. Each hour reinforced it. And the space between, that was where the strain lived. He moved to the edge of the chamber and sat once more, his back resting against the cold stone wall. The night continued its slow passage. The clouds drifted, the moon lowered, and the hours came, one by one. Each answered with the same steady motion, each holding the balance just a little longer. But beneath it all, the traveller could feel it, that quiet, growing weight, not yet breaking, not yet rising, but waiting, always waiting, for the moment when the rhythm faltered, for the space between sounds to stretch just a little too far. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, to the bell, to the silence, to the shape beneath the fog, and to the quiet understanding that had begun to settle fully into place. This was not a task for a night, not for a journey, not for a passing traveller. The hours did not end, the bell did not stop, and what lay below did not forget. The rhythm had held, hour after hour. The bell had answered. The rope had moved. The sound had spread, and the fog below had settled again and again into its quiet, restrained stillness. But now something changed. It was not sudden, not sharp. It came slowly, like a breath drawn too long. The traveller felt it before he understood it. A delay, small, almost nothing. The hour approached, as it always did, not with sound, not with signal, but with that quiet certainty he had come to recognize. He stood, moved to the rope, placed his hand upon it, waited. The moment should have arrived. It did not. He frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in awareness. The rhythm had shifted. He could feel it, not broken, but stretched, like a thread, pulled just a little too tight. He held the rope, his grip steady. The chamber felt different. The air heavier, the walls closer, and beneath it all, that quiet strain, stronger now. He waited a moment longer. Then, choosing not to let the silence deepen further, he pulled. Gong. The bell rang, but this time the sound was not the same. It did not spread smoothly. It did not settle gently into the space. It struck, sharper, heavier, as though something resisted it. The vibration moved through him, but not with the same calm certainty as before. It wavered, just slightly, like a note played on a string pulled too tight. Below, the fog responded, not with a slow, measured shift, but with movement, sudden, uneven. The traveller stepped to the window. The mist churned, not violently, but with a restless motion that had not been there before. It rose, fell, forward, in not myself, and then the shape returned. Clearer now, larger. No longer just a suggestion beneath the surface. It pressed upward, its form stretching the fog into something almost visible, a curve, a depth, a presence that could not be mistaken for mere movement. The traveller's breath slowed. His grip on the stone edge tightened slightly. The bell's sound faded, but the fog did not settle. Not this time. The movement continued, quieter now, but persistent. He turned back toward the rope. Something was wrong, not in a way that demanded panic, but in a way that required understanding. The rhythm had faltered, even if only slightly, and something below had noticed. He stepped closer to the rope again, waited. The next hour approached, but now he could not feel it as clearly. The certainty had softened, blurred. As though the monastery itself was unsure of the passing of time, he closed his eyes, listened, not to the bell, not to the fog, but to the space between, the silence. It felt different, not empty, not calm, but full, like a held breath that had not yet been released. Behind him, a movement, soft, slow. He turned. At the edge of the staircase, just within the dim light, the old man stood. He had come without sound, without warning, as he always did. But now, something about him had changed. He seemed lighter, not in presence, but in form, as though the edges of him were no longer as firm, no longer as certain against the shadows. His gaze met the traveller's, and for the first time there was urgency, not panic, not fear, but a quiet, unmistakable urgency. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. His eyes moved to the rope, then back. The meaning was clear. Do not wait. The traveller nodded, though no words had been spoken. He reached for the rope again. His hand closed around it. The weight felt heavier now, not in mass, but in meaning. He did not wait for the hour. He pulled. Gong. The bell rang again. The sound struck deeper this time, pushing outward with more force, as though compensating for something lost. The chamber trembled slightly, not in movement, but in feeling. Below, the fog reacted. The shape halted, not fully, but enough. The restless motion slowed. The surface began, gradually, to settle. The traveller held the rope longer, long enough for the sound to fully spread, long enough for the vibration to reach whatever lay beneath. Then, slowly, he released it. Silence returned. But now it was fragile. The old man remained at the base of the staircase, watching. His form flickered slightly in the dim light, as if the space he occupied was no longer holding him as firmly as before. The traveller understood. The rhythm was not self-sustaining. It required precision, consistency. Without it, the balance weakened, and the one who had held it before was fading. He looked back toward the window. The fog had settled again, but not completely. Small movements remained, subtle, persistent, waiting. He turned back to the rope. His hand rested against it, steady, ready. He would not wait for the hour again. Not fully, not blindly. He would listen, feel, respond. The bell could not fall silent, not even for a moment too long, because below something had begun to remember. And above, the one who had kept the hours for so long was no longer able to hold them alone. The rope rested in his hands, steady, familiar, no longer cold in the way it had first felt, though its weight remained quiet, constant, understood. The traveller did not wait for the hour now. He listened, not to the silence alone, but to what moved beneath it, the faint shift in the air, the subtle tension in the stone, the quiet, almost imperceptible pull that told him when the balance began to stretch too thin, and when it did, he pulled. Gong. The bell answered, again and again. Not bound to the strict passing of hours as before, but guided now by something deeper, a rhythm that lived beneath time, rather than within it, below. The fog responded. Each toe pressed it gently back into stillness, smoothing the restless movements that had begun to grow, not forcing, not resisting, but reminding. The shape beneath the mist remained. He could feel it, even when he did not see it, even when the surface lay calm and unbroken. It was there, waiting, listening, but no longer rising, as it had, not while the bell continued. Behind him, at the base of the staircase, the old man stood, or what remained of him. His form had grown faint, the edges of his presence softening, like mist touched by morning light. He did not move closer. He did not need to. The traveller felt him, a quiet acknowledgment, a passing of something that had never been spoken. The old man's gaze lifted once more, toward the unseen bell above, then back, and for the first time he inclined his head, not as a greeting, not as a warning, but as a farewell. The traveller had not stepped toward him, did not reach out. There was no need. Some things, once understood, require no action, only acceptance. Another shift in the air, subtle, familiar. The traveller turned back to the rope. His hands found their place upon it. Without thought, he pulled. Gong. The sound spread outward, steady and full. Below, the fog settled, the shape stilled. The balance held. When the sound faded, he released the rope slowly, and when he turned again, the old man was gone. No movement marked his passing. No sound followed. He had simply ceased to be there, as though the space he occupied had finally been allowed to rest. The traveller stood alone in the tower. The chamber felt quieter now, not emptier, but complete. The weight had not lifted. It had settled fully. He moved to the window once more. The night was changing. At the edge of the horizon, a faint light had begun to appear, soft, pale, almost uncertain. The first hint of it. The clouds thinned, their shapes losing the heavy stillness of night. The moon faded, retreating quietly as the sky began its slow transformation. Below, the fog remained, but it was calmer now, smoother, held in a gentle, steady stillness that did not strain against its boundaries. He watched it, not with curiosity, not with concern, but with quiet awareness. This was no longer something to be discovered. It was something to be kept. He turned back to the rope. The bell waited. It would always wait. Not for a person, not for a moment, but for the continuation of what must be done. He understood now. The monastery did not choose its keeper. It received one, not through words, not through ceremony, but through presence, through the quiet decision to remain. He stepped closer to the center of the chamber, placed his hand upon the rope, and stood. The light of dawn grew slowly behind him, spilling gently through the narrow window, softening the edges of the stone, touching the worn fibers of the rope with a faint, golden warmth. The hours would continue. Day would pass it into night, night into day. The bell would ring again and again and again, not as a warning, not as a call, but as a steady, unbroken thread holding two worlds in balance. Above, silence; below, stillness; and between them, the one who remains. The traveler closed his eyes just for a moment, not in rest, but in quiet acknowledgement. Then, when the time came, he pulled. Bing! The sound rose into the morning light, deep and steady, carrying with it the calm weight of something that would not end. And far below, the fog did not move.